Hi everybody, and welcome to the very first screencast for Edit 6600E. We're going to start off, before we dive into multicultural issues, looking at the context in which we'll be looking at all this. And that context, of course, is schooling. And on this first slide here, you see three very smart people, very well-known people. I'm not going to tell you who they are. You can figure it out for yourselves. But they have some very somewhat depressing things to say about schools and education. First guy says schools have not necessarily much to do with education. They're mainly institutions of control where certain basic habits must be inculcated in the young. Education is quite different and has little place in school. The second guy says simply that it's a miracle that curiosity survives formal education. And the third person, the lady, says, my grandmother wanted me to get a good education, so she kept me as far away from schools as possible. Now, I'm not quite that pessimistic about schools. I don't think we can afford to be, since 95% of the kids in the world are going to get whatever education they get from schools, maybe. Anyway, but I think that all three of these people are trying to say something important, and that is that very often schools, the way they are currently built and run, work against the goals that we have for education. So all the way throughout this course, lurking in the background of everything that we do, are going to be some really key questions. We're going to be thinking about what the purpose of schooling is in our country. What are we trying to do? And is it possible that schooling in our country has different purposes for different students? Or possibly also, does it serve different purposes for parents than it does for students? Does it serve purposes for businesses and corporations, or government or society, that might be at odds with the purposes that we have for students? So I want you to be thinking of this larger educational context this week especially, to kind of introduce what we're up to. And then of course there's the other big theme of the course, technology. I told you who these two people were because they're slightly less well known, but very well known people. And of course, Sidney Harris said the real danger is not that computers will begin to think like men, but rather that men will begin to think like computers. And C.P. Snow, technology is a queer thing. It brings you great gifts with one hand, and it stabs you in the back with the other. And again, I think we can see both of these dangers and these potentials when we start looking at technology in schools. And some of the questions that we're going to keep asking ourselves are, how do we usually use technology in education? How could we use it for education? How could we use it? And how should we be using it? In other words, what's the common practice now? What are the possibilities? And what should or shouldn't change? And again, these are some questions that are going to underlie much of what we look at throughout the summer term. Okay, so the first thing you're going to be reading is an article by Ira Shore called Education is Politics. But the reason I've listed Paulo Freire as a second author here is that basically Ira Shore is writing about Freire's ideas. And here's a picture here of the two of them together. Shore is the young guy on the left, and Freire is the guy with the beard on the right. And Freire was a radical educator originally in his home in Brazil. He started literacy campaigns among the peasants, but his literacy was not just about learning letters. It was about learning to use reading and writing as a way to organize, as a way to empower yourself, as a way to demand their fair share of the world. And as a result, he was banned from Brazil for a while and had to live outside the country. And then he was asked back to serve in the Ministry of Education. And he's also worked for the World Council of Churches as their global education director. So he had quite a career before he died a few years ago. And probably his best known book is his first book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So Paulo Freire, Irish Shore, writing about Freire's ideas, is going to, I think you'll enjoy the article. It's not an easy read, but it's a very deep read, so don't let it bother you if you have to read it a little bit slowly. But he's basically saying there is no such thing as neutral education. All education serves somebody's purposes. And of course the questions we have to ask ourselves, especially in a course on diversity, is whose purposes does it serve and whose purposes should it serve? After reading this article, you're going to watch 3 videos which present 3 very different and exciting pictures of how technology could revolutionize or reform education. So the first video is from a guy named Paul Anderson. There's Paul. He's been teaching science in Montana for over 18 years now. He was Montana's Teacher of the Year in 2011. The video is called Classroom Game Design, and it's about the gamification of his science classroom. He was one of the earliest, best-known people to gamify learning, and I think you'll enjoy his video. It's a TED Talk. All 3 of these are TED Talks. You'll find that I have a real passion, I have a real fondness for using TED Talks. So the next one, there's Classroom Game Design. I forgot the effect. Here we go. The next one is from Shelley Wright. That's her wiggling over here on the left. She had been a successful traditional teacher for 10 years, over 10 years, in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Canada, when she kind of stumbled upon a different way to teach. And she has not looked back since. She has a blog, and the address is there should you care to look it up. She's one of the best-known teacher spokespersons for what she calls student-driven learning. And in fact, her video is called The Power of Student-Driven Learning, which, from her point of view, changes everything. Okay, and the last guy you're going to listen to is a guy named Sugata Mitra. He's a professor of educational technology in Newcastle, England. He was the 2013 TED Prize winner, the first TED Prize, I believe, that was handed out for $1 million based on his work, originally a kind of an experiment he did kind of on the side called the hole in the wall. And based on his work in the hole in the wall, what he did is he simply put computers in holes in the wall with keyboard access and stuff, and left them there in some of the worst areas of both England and India, and saw what kids did with them. And I think when you listen to his talk, you'll find out they did some amazing things. So he has a vision for something called, what that he calls the school in the cloud, and he's devoting his $1 million prize to making it happen. So I think you'll enjoy that video too, although it might set you back a little. I know it did me. And then, of course, there are optional things. Every week there's going to be optional resources, and I want to emphasize these are truly optional. I don't expect anybody to watch or read these, but I want to make them available to you. If you might be interested in them, read them, watch them, download them, save them for later, whatever. There's just too much good stuff out there. So if you find yourself interested in Freire's ideas, or if he's somebody you've always wanted to know more about, there's a video on him on YouTube, which you will find a link to in your instructions, called Paulo Freire, Theory in Life. There's also an article by him, it's actually a chapter from one of his books called The Banking Concept of Education, that I think you'll really recognize this one. And then after you listen to Sugata Mitra, if you find yourself, as I did, kind of wondering, can this man be for real? Is this true? Unlike a lot of the professional educational hucksters, he has data to back up what he's saying. And these are 2 articles published in respectable peer-reviewed journals. his one in 2005 about his original hole-in-the-wall experiments, and then one in 2010 about some ongoing experiments. And so, again, those are there for you to check out. So that's it for week 1. Enjoy yourself, and we will all see each other for the very first time on Monday or Tuesday. Bye-bye.